One summer, two gardens sat only a few houses apart. In the first garden, the tomatoes looked tired by mid-July. Small holes covered the leaves. Tiny insects moved across the stems. Marigolds bloomed everywhere in bright orange and yellow, yet the vegetables still seemed stressed and weak. The gardener watered often and tried to do everything correctly, but the problems kept growing week after week. Just nearby, another garden looked completely different. The vegetable plants stood taller. The leaves looked calmer and greener. Bees moved slowly between flowers in the morning sunlight. And instead of rows of marigolds, there was one simple flower spreading gently around the beds. Most people walk right past it at garden centers without giving it much attention. Many gardeners plant marigolds every year expecting protection, but some of the healthiest gardens are quietly using something completely different instead. What makes this surprising is that the flower does not look powerful at all. In fact, it almost looks too soft and simple to matter. Yet after years of watching community gardens, backyard growers, and older gardeners experimenting season after season, the same pattern keeps appearing again and again. If this feels confusing, you are not doing anything wrong. A lot of experienced gardeners are only now beginning to notice this shift too. Before explaining why this happened, it helps to understand something important that many gardening guides accidentally leave out. For a very long time, marigolds became the standard advice for beginner gardeners. Almost every planting guide recommended them beside tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and beans. They were colorful, easy to grow, and simple to find almost anywhere. Over time, many gardeners began treating marigolds almost like a natural shield against every pest problem. But gardening rarely works that way. Older varieties of marigolds often had a much stronger scent than many modern types sold today. Some were useful for certain soil problems. Others helped discourage specific insects under the right conditions. But somewhere along the way, the advice became too simplified. People began expecting marigolds to solve issues they were never designed to solve alone. That is why some gardens full of marigolds still struggle badly with insects. Climate matters. Soil matters. Watering habits matter. Airflow matters. Even the spacing between plants can completely change how pests behave. Two gardeners can grow the exact same flowers and get very different results. A humid garden in the south may attract pests differently than a dry garden farther west. A tightly packed raised bed may hold moisture longer than an open row garden. And when online gardening advice gets reduced to short tips and quick answers, these important details often disappear. Many beginners think they failed when marigolds do not magically protect everything around them. But that disappointment usually comes from unrealistic expectations, not poor gardening skills. The surprising part is that another flower, often costing less than a cup of coffee, may support the garden in a much deeper and quieter way. That flower is the nasturtium. At first glance, nasturtiums do not look especially impressive. Their stems seem delicate. Their leaves feel soft and round. The flowers appear almost playful, with warm shades of orange, yellow, and red. Some gardeners even assume they are too fragile to be useful around vegetables. But once they begin growing, something interesting starts happening. Nasturtiums spread gently across the soil instead of standing stiff and upright. Their leaves catch attention quickly. And strangely enough, insects often notice them before they notice the vegetables nearby. This is where many gardeners experience their first real surprise. Instead of attacking tomatoes or cucumbers first, pests may gather on the nasturtiums instead. Aphids sometimes collect along the tender stems. Beetles may chew the leaves while nearby vegetables remain calmer and healthier. This behavior is often called trap cropping. The flower becomes more attractive to certain insects, pulling attention away from more valuable plants before major damage spreads. The important thing is not that pests disappear completely. Healthy gardens still contain insects. That is normal. The real difference is that the insects become easier to notice and easier to manage early. Many gardeners first discover this accidentally. They walk outside expecting problems on their vegetables, only to notice the nasturtiums carrying most of the insect activity instead. Meanwhile, the tomatoes continue ripening peacefully only a few feet away. But attracting insects away from vegetables is only part of the story. What surprises many older gardeners even more is how these flowers slowly change the entire feeling of the garden itself. Nasturtiums do not simply sit in neat rows waiting for attention. They move naturally through open spaces. They soften the edges around raised beds and containers. Their leaves spread over bare soil, helping reduce direct sun exposure and slowing moisture loss during hotter weeks. That small change can make a garden feel calmer almost without anyone noticing. Bare soil dries faster. It also heats up faster. When low-growing plants gently cover those open spaces, the ground often stays cooler and more balanced. In dry climates especially, this can reduce stress around nearby vegetables. Many seniors begin appreciating this style of gardening more over time because it asks for less constant correction. Instead of pulling weeds every day or adjusting every empty corner, the garden starts filling itself naturally. Experienced gardeners often reach a point where they stop trying to control every detail. They begin observing more carefully instead. They notice which plants cooperate with each other. They pay attention to where moisture stays longer. They see how insects move through the space. And in many gardens, nasturtiums seem to encourage that slower rhythm naturally. There is also something emotionally comforting about gardens that feel softer and more balanced. A garden does not always need perfect straight lines to be healthy. Sometimes the spaces that look slightly relaxed end up supporting more life overall. And there is one unexpected reason pollinators seem especially drawn to these flowers during difficult summers. Many flowers today are bred mostly for appearance. Some have dense petals or unusual shapes that look beautiful to people but are harder for pollinators to access easily. Bees and beneficial insects usually prefer simple, open flowers where they can reach nectar quickly without struggling through layers of petals. Nasturtiums provide that easy access. On warm mornings, bees often move from flower to flower steadily and calmly. Even during periods of heat, nasturtiums may continue blooming when some other flowers begin slowing down. This can become especially noticeable during difficult summers. In dry climates, nasturtiums may appreciate partial afternoon shade. In cooler regions, they often tolerate more direct sunlight comfortably. Raised beds sometimes dry faster than in-ground gardens, so watering patterns may shift slightly depending on where they grow. Containers create another difference. In pots, the plants may stay smaller and require more consistent moisture. In open beds, they often spread farther and help shade the soil naturally. These small environmental differences matter more than many gardening guides explain. Another common mistake involves fertilizer. Many gardeners feed flowering plants heavily expecting more blooms. But nasturtiums often respond differently. Too much fertilizer can produce huge leaves with fewer flowers. The plant becomes lush but less useful for attracting pollinators. Simple conditions usually work better. That is part of why older gardeners often appreciate these flowers. They do not demand constant feeding or endless adjustments. But strangely, many gardeners accidentally stop these flowers from helping at all without realizing it. One of the biggest mistakes is overcrowding. People sometimes pack flowers tightly beside vegetables expecting stronger protection. But crowded plants reduce airflow and trap moisture. This can encourage mildew, stress, and additional pest problems instead of preventing them. Timing also matters. If nasturtiums are planted too late, insects may already be established elsewhere in the garden before the flowers become useful. Companion planting works best when the garden develops balance gradually from the beginning of the season. Another misunderstanding involves expectations. Some gardeners expect instant results within days. But healthy gardens rarely change overnight. Companion plants are not emergency treatments. They work more slowly and quietly by influencing how insects and pollinators move through the environment over time. Watering habits can also create problems. Not every plant wants the same amount of moisture. Some gardeners water every corner equally, even when certain plants prefer slightly drier conditions. Overwatering creates stress just as easily as underwatering. If your garden has not responded the way you hoped, that is very common. Most gardeners learn these patterns through observation, not perfection. And perhaps the most important idea is this: healthier gardens usually come from balance, not elimination. The goal is not to remove every insect from the yard. That rarely happens naturally. The goal is to create an environment where problems stay smaller and easier to manage. Once many gardeners begin noticing this next small change, they often stop relying on sprays nearly as much. The real hidden benefit of nasturtiums is not simply what they attract. It is what they reveal. Insects often appear on nasturtiums early. Sometimes days before larger outbreaks spread across vegetables. That early warning changes everything. Instead of discovering major damage too late, gardeners notice smaller signs earlier and respond gently before problems grow. A few aphids on nasturtiums may signal that conditions are shifting. A cluster of beetles may reveal where attention is needed first. The flower becomes less like a defense system and more like an observation tool. This changes the gardener's behavior too. Rather than spraying the entire garden automatically, people begin walking through more slowly. They check leaves calmly in the morning. They notice patterns earlier. Small adjustments replace large reactions. And over time, the garden often becomes more stable because of that awareness alone. The best gardens are usually watched carefully, not controlled aggressively. That lesson becomes clearer with experience. Many younger gardeners believe success comes from doing more. More fertilizer. More sprays. More products. More corrections. But older gardeners often discover the opposite. Simpler habits and closer observation usually create steadier results. And surprisingly, this flower may even help gardeners spend less time working overall. As gardening bodies age, comfort matters more. Low-maintenance plants become easier to appreciate. Fewer chemical sprays mean less lifting, mixing, and carrying equipment. Ground-covering flowers reduce some weeding pressure naturally. And spreading plants soften the garden without requiring constant shaping. Many seniors slowly move toward gardening methods that cooperate with nature instead of constantly fighting it. That shift often brings more enjoyment too. Instead of rushing outside to fix every small issue, experienced gardeners may simply observe first. They understand that some insects disappear naturally after a few days. They know that weather changes can solve problems that looked serious at first. This calmer approach protects energy as much as it protects plants. And emotionally, it changes the relationship with the garden itself. Gardening becomes less about perfect control and more about participation. The garden starts feeling alive instead of managed. Many older gardeners say they enjoy their gardens more once they stop trying to force every result. They notice birds more often. Pollinators become easier to spot. Morning walks through the yard feel slower and more peaceful. But there is still one important place where marigolds may actually work better. Marigolds still have value in many gardens. They create beautiful borders and bright edging around beds. Compact varieties fit nicely into containers and smaller spaces. Certain types may help reduce some soil nematode problems under the right conditions. And visually, marigolds can bring cheerful color for long periods during summer. This is important because no single flower solves every gardening problem. Sometimes online advice swings too far in one direction. One year a plant becomes highly praised. The next year people suddenly act as though it never worked at all. Gardening is usually more balanced than that. Mixed planting often works best. Marigolds can still support pollinators. Nasturtiums can still attract insects away from vegetables. Herbs can confuse certain pests with strong scents. Diversity creates resilience. The goal is not replacing one miracle plant with another miracle plant. The goal is building a calmer and healthier environment overall. And often, the healthiest gardens are not the most expensive or complicated ones. They are simply the gardens where observation happens regularly and gently. A gardener notices which corner stays wet after rain. They see where bees gather first in the morning. They recognize which plants naturally support each other. Those small observations slowly become more valuable than any product label or quick gardening trick. If you decide to try nasturtiums, there is no need to redesign your entire yard at once. A small experiment is enough. One corner beside tomatoes. One raised bed. One container near cucumbers. Then simply watch. Notice which insects appear first. Observe how moisture changes under the leaves. Pay attention to pollinators during warm mornings. Gardening becomes much more enjoyable when curiosity replaces pressure. And if you are comfortable sharing, I am curious whether marigolds or nasturtiums have worked better in your own garden over the years. Many viewers discover that the gardeners who struggle the least are often the ones doing less, but noticing more. In the end, healthier gardens usually come from balance rather than force. Simple flowers sometimes outperform expensive solutions quietly and slowly. Observation matters more than constant correction. And sometimes the smartest thing a garden teaches us is when to step back, slow down, and stop trying quite so hard. Because very often, the garden improves when we simply observe what it has been trying to show us all along.